The sky that morning was soft with clouds, the kind that look like they might break into tears, but are still holding it together. I wore the lilac scarf Polo loved. It always reminded him of the sky before bedtime, as he called it. It had been his favorite color since he was 3, and I never forgot that detail. I tied it neatly around my neck, adjusted the pearl clasp I'd inherited from my late mother, and checked the mirror one last time. I didn't look rich, but I didn't look poor either. I looked invisible, which is how my son's wife preferred me to be. The wrapped gift sat on the passenger seat beside me, a handmade wooden train set from a local craftsman, with Polo's name carved into the side of the caboose. I'd ordered it a month ago. It cost more than I usually spent, but it felt worth it. He's the only one in that house who lights up when he sees me. I parked 2 blocks away. There was room in front of the house, but I didn't want to cause a scene, as Catherine once put it. She never said things directly. It was always in that tone, light, dismissive, sharp as a knife wrapped in lace. I rang the bell and waited. Catherine opened the door with a wineglass in one hand and a perfectly controlled smile on her lips. "Oh," she said, tilting her head. "You actually came." I smiled. I wouldn't miss it. She looked down at the gift in my hands. "You didn't have to bring anything, you know. Polo already has everything he needs." "I'm sure he does," I said gently, "but I thought he might like this." She stepped aside reluctantly, like letting me in was a favor. The house buzzed with laughter and music, the scent of roasted lamb and rosemary drifting from the kitchen. Balloons floated over the dining table, and children ran back and forth across the hardwood floors. Somewhere in the backyard, I could hear the pop of bubble guns and the barks of a clown making balloon animals. Eric, my son, was refilling pitchers of lemonade. He gave me a distracted wave, then turned back to his task without a word. My stomach clenched. No hug. No, "Happy you're here, Mum." Nothing. Then I heard it. "Grandma!" Polo burst through the hallway in his paper crown and threw his arms around me. "You came! I told Daddy you'd come." I hugged him tight, closing my eyes for a moment, wishing I could freeze us like this, him still small enough to need me, to love me without shame. "I brought you something," I said, kneeling. "Come on, let's open it together." But before we could sit, Catherine called out, "Polo, the magician is starting in 5 minutes. Don't keep your friends waiting." Polo hesitated, glancing at the box in his hands. "Can I take it outside?" "Later, sweetheart," Catherine said, her tone saccharine. "Grandma needs to rest." Rest? I wasn't even offered a seat yet. "I'll catch up with you in a bit, love," I told him, and he ran off into the chaos with a reluctant smile. Catherine motioned for me to follow her to the dining area. The table was long and formal, with name cards and linen napkins. I noticed immediately. My name was at the far end, squeezed between the wall and the swinging door to the kitchen, practically in exile. I sat, smoothing my skirt, folding my hands in my lap. The seat was near the caterers and away from conversation. Still, I smiled. I would endure this, like always. For Polo. Dinner began with toasts, laughter, clinking glasses. Catherine, radiant in a backless silver dress, thanked everyone for coming. Her parents beamed. Eric looked tired, distant. No one introduced me. The first course was served. As people passed plates and complimented the wine, I focused on eating quietly. Then I heard it. "So, Samantha," Catherine called out suddenly, loud enough to command attention. "Tell us what it's like being retired. I imagine it's peaceful, lots of naps and TV, right?" I blinked. Heads turned. A few polite chuckles. "I still do some consulting here and there," I said calmly. "Keeps me sharp." "Oh, consulting," she said, dramatically placing a hand on her chest. "Of course. That's the term, isn't it? For not working?" The laughter this time was less polite. Eric looked up, his fork mid-air. "Kath, don't—" She waved him off. "I'm just teasing. Samantha's got a good sense of humor, don't you?" I smiled faintly, though I could feel my ears burning. Of course. I mean, she went on, you were in, what? Secretarial work? Or was it something in reception, back when people still used fax machines? I worked in operations management, I corrected gently. Catherine blinked. Oh, I see. So you organize things, like a planner. That's cute. The table was quiet now. Eric shifted uncomfortably. Even Catherine's father cleared his throat. Then she added, Eric told me you didn't go to university. That must have made it hard to move up in the world, but I guess not everyone is cut out for high-level positions. I set down my knife and looked at her, my voice quiet but firm. I may not have had a degree, Catherine, but I built something with my own hands. From nothing. I didn't marry into it. I earned it. She laughed lightly. Of course, of course. No need to get emotional. We're all family here. I wanted to leave then, but I saw Polo peek in through the door and wave at me. I stayed for him. Catherine stood to pour more wine and suddenly looked around the room, as if making an announcement. Actually, she said with a sharp smile, I think this evening would be so much more relaxed if people knew their place. Eric? He froze. She pointed toward me. Tell your mother it's time to go. This is our home, and quite frankly, she's making things tense. My heart stopped. Eric looked at her, then at me, and in the longest silence of my life, he opened his mouth and said, Mom, maybe it's best if you just leave, just for today. I sat still for a moment, stunned, and then I stood. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I wrapped my scarf around my shoulders and picked up my purse. And as I walked away, Catherine muttered just loud enough for all to hear, Get this loser out of the table. I closed the door quietly behind me and stood on the porch. For a minute, I couldn't move. But then I inhaled deeply, turned, and walked back to my car. What they didn't know, what Catherine didn't know, was that the loser she had just kicked out was the silent majority shareholder of the company where she worked. The same company she bragged about running meetings in, strutted around in her heels like she owned the place. She had no idea who I really was, but she would tomorrow, and I would no longer be silent. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. No alarm, no birdsong, just a strange stillness in the room, like the air was holding its breath. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the neat creases of the comforter, and pressed my bare feet against the cool floor. A strange strength pulsed through me, the kind I hadn't felt in years. Not since I was building the company from scratch, with nothing but a worn briefcase and the fire of necessity. The echoes of last night still rang in my ears. Catherine's sharp voice, the quiet of the guests, my son's hollow eyes. But something had changed in me as I stepped outside their house. Something broke, yes, but something else opened. A door I had kept closed for too long. I wouldn't cry over this. I wouldn't hide. And I certainly wouldn't allow anyone, especially someone like Catherine, to write the narrative of my life. By 7:15 a.m., I was showered, dressed in slate gray trousers, a fitted navy blouse, and low black heels. My hair, silver-streaked and neatly pinned, framed a face I hadn't really seen in a while. Not as a mother, not as a grandmother, but as a woman with power, with dignity. I stepped into the elevator of the glass building I had helped design nearly 2 decades ago. My reflection in its mirror-paneled walls didn't flinch this time. As the elevator rose, floor by floor, I let myself remember. The sleepless nights during the first financial collapse, the rebranding strategies that pulled us through the digital age, the teams I mentored, the divisions I streamlined. 35 years of grit. The doors opened to the top floor. Reception greeted me with the usual warmth. Good morning, Miss Ellis, said Dana, standing immediately. I nodded. Morning, Dana. I'll be in my office. She handed me the day's schedule. There's a quarterly planning meeting with the executive team at 10. Legal sent over the partnership contract revisions for review, and the director of marketing submitted the new brand campaign proposal for your signature. My eyes paused on that last note. Director of Marketing. That would be Andrew, who just so happened to have Catherine working under him. I walked into my office and shut the door behind me. My corner space, high ceilings, walnut desk, walls lined with leadership books, and framed photos from past global projects, still felt like home. I had kept it low profile for years. People knew me as Ms. Ellis, CEO. No photos of family, no mention of Eric, no connection between Samantha, the woman they barely tolerated at dinner tables, and Ms. Ellis, the woman whose name was on the top of every executive contract. I placed my purse in the drawer and sat at my desk. Then I pulled out a file folder I'd quietly started over a year ago when I first heard that Catherine had joined the company. Back then, I had said nothing. I wanted to give her space, to see what she would make of herself on her own merit. She had come in as an experienced strategist, recommending herself through her mother's old connections. I never intervened. It was my silent act of grace. Now I opened the folder. Her full name, Catherine Monette Grant. Hired 14 months ago. Assigned to the Content Innovation Team. Recently moved into a junior managerial role. Not a bad trajectory, at least on paper. But paper is thin. I buzzed Dana. Could you ask Andrew to stop by after his 10 a.m.? Yes, ma'am. And Dana? Yes. Please ask HR for a confidential overview of complaints or concerns filed within the marketing division this past year. I'd like to review the internal culture. There was a slight pause on the other end. Right away, Ms. Ellis. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. Below, the city was slowly coming alive, unaware that something small, but very important, was beginning to shift. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was clarity. Did Catherine behave this way only at home, intoxicated by control and ego? Or had she infected this company, my company, with the same arrogance she used to belittle me? I opened the company intranet and accessed her team's recent feedback evaluations. Her name appeared in the digital summary of a recent survey. A few comments stood out. Manager lacks empathy, plays favorites. Criticism is often personal and condescending. Projects get dismissed unless they align with her personal taste. The comments weren't signed, of course, but they didn't surprise me. I kept reading. In meeting transcripts, her tone was described as decisive, assertive, dominating. Andrew himself had flagged her twice in the last quarter for overstepping protocol and bypassing senior input. Interesting. I clicked through her submitted projects. Slick presentations, flashy language, but thin on substance, and oddly familiar in style. I recognized one campaign almost word for word. It was an adaptation of a proposal that had been developed by a junior associate 3 months earlier. A young woman named Rana, someone I'd mentored discreetly over coffee and weekend chats. That work had been lifted. No attribution. I felt a chill run down my spine. Not from surprise, but from recognition. This was exactly how Catherine operated, dressed in polish, but rotting at the core. At 10:52 a.m., there was a knock. Andrew stepped in, tall and composed, holding a tablet. Good morning, Ms. Ellis. You wanted to see me? Yes, Andrew. Come in. Close the door. He sat across from me, as he'd done dozens of times over the years. I want to ask you something frankly, I said. Off the record. You've been leading marketing for nearly 5 years. You know the culture inside out. He nodded cautiously. Do you think Catherine Monette Grant is a constructive presence here? Andrew exhaled, shifting slightly in his chair. She's ambitious, he said carefully. Smart in presentations, driven, but she doesn't work well with others. She undercuts junior staff. A few have asked for transfers. Have there been formal complaints? Not formal. No one wants to risk career damage, but I've had enough hallway conversations to know there's tension. I leaned forward. Would you trust her with leadership-level decisions? Another pause. No, he said finally. Not without tight oversight. Thank you, I said, and waved him off with a smile. That'll be all for now. When he left, I opened a new file on my computer and titled it, Catherine, Performance Review Inquiry. She'd told her guests that I was a loser. She had no idea she was still on probation, and I was about to remind her who signed her paychecks. Tomorrow, I'd start with a meeting she didn't know I'd be attending. And this time, I'd be at the head of the table. I didn't lose sleep over Catherine's words. I don't let people like her cost me sleep. I let them cost me paperwork. By morning, my legal advisor had already responded to my request. HR had pulled the necessary records. My executive authority gave me access to everything I needed without raising the slightest suspicion. And Catherine? She was likely somewhere downstairs right now, sipping an overpriced latte and gossiping with interns about whose outfit looked corporate enough. She still didn't know that the loser she tried to throw out of her house was the woman who signs the checks, greenlights her campaigns, and had built the very office tower she strutted into each day. But I wasn't here to prove a point to her. I was here to uncover something deeper and much more important. Because the reports I was reading now weren't personal. They weren't about birthday dinners or family dinners. They were professional and disturbing. Line by line, page by page, the picture became clear. Catherine had been systematically targeting older employees, especially women. Catherine asked if I needed someone to explain TikTok to me slowly, since I wasn't born with a smartphone. She introduced me to clients as the team's legacy talent and laughed. She rolled her eyes when I corrected a statistic and said, "All right, Grandma, we get it. You read a lot." I was passed up for a promotion that went to someone with less experience, and when I asked why, she said it was time for a fresh face. These weren't one-off complaints. They were a pattern, dozens of them, all referencing a toxic undercurrent that had somehow slipped past the very policies I'd implemented years ago to protect employees from this exact kind of behavior. And it hadn't stopped at ageism. There were reports of manipulation, of team members being isolated if they disagreed with her, of junior employees being used to do the bulk of creative work, only for Catherine to present it as her own. Several staff had transferred departments just to avoid her. Most damning, multiple anonymous complaints that had been flagged, but never escalated. Someone in mid-management had been brushing these under the rug. I made a note to find out who. The names of the people she was targeting weren't strangers. I recognized them. I'd shaken hands with them in hallways, mentored some of them when they were fresh out of school. They were the soul of this company, and Catherine had been quietly breaking them down, one comment, one slight, one stolen credit at a time. I looked up from the folder. This wasn't just about Catherine. It was about every manager who said nothing, every executive who allowed this rot to fester because she delivered her slides on time and smiled at board meetings. No more. I buzzed my assistant. "Dana, connect me with the external workplace conduct investigator we used last year, the one from Zurich. This needs to be discreet." "Yes, Ms. Ellis. Should I loop in HR?" "Not yet. I want unfiltered insight before this reaches anyone with skin in the game." "And the investigation is specific to Catherine Monette Grant?" "No. It starts there. But it extends to anyone who helped her thrive unchecked." "Understood." I hung up and made my way down to the quiet executive review room. No cameras, no staff interruptions. Just me and the truth. There, I activated the anonymous feedback channel I'd built for emergencies. It hadn't been used in almost 2 years. Within the hour, messages began to pour in. Stories, screenshots, notes. They weren't dramatic, but they were precise, brutal in their accumulation. By 4 p.m., I had a full psychological profile of the environment Catherine had created and the fear she'd used to protect it. She didn't rule with excellence. She ruled with fear of retaliation, exclusion, and gossip. The most heartbreaking part? These people had loved their jobs, and she had turned their daily work into something they now survived. I sat back, folded my hands, and exhaled slowly. Not out of sadness, out of clarity. This wasn't about my ego. I had nothing to prove to her. Catherine's worst insult was calling me a loser. But the truth was, she had been losing for a long time. Losing her ethics, losing people's trust. And soon, she'd be losing something far more measurable. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning reform. Catherine was about to discover that the woman she humiliated wasn't just Eric's mother. She was the founder, the CEO, and the original architect of everything Catherine had abused. And she was watching now, closely. It had been a long time coming. For days, I had reviewed every report, spoken discreetly with team members, and quietly observed Catherine's behavior through a lens that had nothing to do with personal pain, and everything to do with ethics, leadership, and culture. She wasn't just disrespectful, she was dangerous. Not because she was malicious in the traditional sense, but because she operated with unchecked arrogance and no understanding of the people she trampled over. Still, I wasn't going to fire her. Not yet. That would be too easy. Dismissal wouldn't teach her anything. She would spin herself as a victim, land in another company through her mother's network, and continue the same behavior elsewhere. No, Catherine needed something deeper. She needed to learn what real work looked like, to understand the quiet strength and dignity of the very people she dismissed, sneered at, and stole from. She needed to feel it. And I had just the opportunity. At 9 a.m. sharp, I sent a formal email through HR to the head of department rotations. A new initiative, something I'd actually been drafting for months, called Ladder Insight, designed to give managerial staff temporary rotations in support roles across the company. Shipping, IT help desk, janitorial, field calls from customer service, and in this case, kitchen work. The idea was simple. You can't lead what you don't understand. I had tested this model years ago during a merger in Madrid, and it transformed the company culture overnight. This time, the pilot program would begin right here. And guess who was at the top of my list? By noon, the first memos had gone out. At 1:15 p.m., Catherine stormed into HR. I watched from my office through the narrow security camera feed. She was trying to keep her voice low, but even from a grainy speaker, the tone was unmistakable. "Washing dishes?" she hissed. "Excuse me? That must be a mistake. I'm in management. I don't do food service." The HR manager, seasoned, unfazed, responded calmly. "All management staff will rotate for 5 working days. This came from executive oversight. It's part of the Ladder Insight program. Your assignment is in catering, starting tomorrow. You'll report to the kitchen supervisor at 7 a.m. "I have meetings," Catherine snapped. "They've been rescheduled." "This is absurd. Who approved this?" "The executive office." She paused. "Which one?" But she didn't get an answer. I had instructed them not to give names. That was part of the plan. Catherine didn't know I worked here because I had made sure she never connected the dots. Years ago, when Eric told me he was getting serious with her, I had only one condition. Don't tell her where I work or what I do. Say I'm retired if you must, but keep my name out of anything that could give her access to our family holdings. He didn't understand at the time, thought I was being paranoid, but I'd seen the type before. People who chased power by proximity. People who judged worth by handbags, car models, and how many assistants you had. Catherine was charm wrapped in calculation. She would have sunk her claws into everything if she'd known I was behind the company she now strutted through like it owed her something. But now she'd be waking up at 6 a.m., putting her hair in a net, wearing non-slip shoes, and standing next to Maritza in the catering kitchen, scrubbing trays and sorting silverware under fluorescent lights. And Maritza? She's been working in that kitchen for 22 years. She doesn't tolerate entitlement. She runs her team like a ballet company, structured, coordinated, and built on mutual respect. At 7:05 the next morning, I arrived early with my coffee and stood at the back of the service corridor just outside the employee kitchen. No one noticed me. Most people don't look behind the service windows. But I saw Catherine the moment she entered. Gone were her stilettos. She wore standard company sneakers, gray uniform pants, and a hairnet that barely contained her pride. Her shoulders were stiff, her jaw clenched. Maritza handed her a stack of stainless steel trays. You'll rinse, then sanitize. And when you're done, you'll restock. Catherine opened her mouth, probably to object, but Maritza cut her off with a single look. So she rinsed, all day. Not one task outside the line of duty. No laptop, no personal assistant. Just her, hot water, and a pair of industrial gloves. I didn't watch the whole day. That would have been cruel. But I checked in just before lunch. Catherine looked different. Tired, yes, but also stripped of something. That untouchable layer she wore like perfume. It wasn't gone, but it was cracked. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. Because this wasn't revenge. This was reflection. Let her see how the people she dismissed show up early. How they take pride in the invisible work. How they hold this place together, without corner offices or applause. Let her feel the burn of humility in her palms. If there was even a sliver of decency in her, maybe she'd see what I had been trying to teach, without ever raising my voice. That dignity isn't worn. It's lived. And until you've walked a mile in someone's worn-out shoes, you don't deserve to lead anyone. She didn't know it yet, but this was the most valuable training she'd ever receive. And it didn't come with a certificate. It came with suds and sweat and the truth. By the third day, I had seen enough. But I stayed. Not because I needed more evidence, but because I had to be absolutely sure. There's something about arrogance that can hide itself even in truth. I needed to see if just once, a flicker of humility would crack through Catherine's flawless, foundation-laced mask. It never did. The morning began like the last two. Catherine stomped into the staff kitchen 5 minutes late, adjusting her blouse under the standard issue apron, rolling her eyes the moment Maritza handed her gloves. She didn't greet anyone. She didn't thank anyone. She didn't even glance at the people who ran that kitchen like a symphony. Instead, she muttered, "Back to the dungeon," under her breath, loud enough for the others to hear. I was already there, in a navy blue tech support polo and loose work trousers, my silver hair tucked beneath a cap, clipboard in hand. Most people didn't look at me twice. Some nodded politely. Others asked if I needed help finding equipment. I let them believe I was new. It made observation cleaner. And it gave me the freedom to stand just out of frame, watching, noting, listening. And what I saw that day hollowed out any lingering hope I had. "Is there a reason?" Catherine snapped at Dolores as the older woman restocked ladles. "That we're arranging these like we're preparing for war?" Dolores looked at her calmly. "It's how the team has always done it. It keeps service flowing." Catherine chuckled dryly. "Right. Because if there's one thing the world can't live without, it's perfect ladle placement." I saw Dolores blink hard, the way people do when they're holding something back. Dignity, perhaps, or pain. It's a delicate thing. Later, in the dish pit, Catherine leaned over the young kitchen hand, Miguel, who was drying cutlery with quiet care. "You know," she said, "if you put this kind of effort into getting a diploma, you might not have to do this forever." Miguel said nothing. He didn't have to. His silence was deafening. That was the thing about Catherine. She didn't raise her voice. She wielded cruelty like a scalpel, precise, glinting, sharp. She didn't explode. She eroded, slowly, relentlessly. And the others? They endured it the way the floor drains endured hot grease, out of necessity, because they had rent to pay, kids to feed, papers to renew, hopes that stretched longer than Catherine's career ever would. In the break room, I sat beside Maritza and Nima once again, pretending to scroll on a borrowed company tablet. "She asked if I've ever used email before," Nima said, biting into a pear. "Said I probably grew up using smoke signals." Maritza scoffed. "She told me I'd be happier if I smiled more and stopped talking like a landlady from a telenovela." I asked her what she meant. She said my voice was aggressively domestic. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not out of anger. Out of something colder. Certainty. "She doesn't see people," I said quietly. "Only roles." Nima nodded. "And she thinks ours are disposable." That afternoon, I followed her during inventory. Catherine was alone, checking off stock while sipping from her designer bottle she had refused to part with, despite the hygiene policy. Ugh, she muttered. This place smells like boiled regret. She opened the spice cupboard and sniffed dramatically. Why does everything smell like cumin and surrender? I wrote that down too. But the worst came later. She cornered a temp, Caro, a bright-eyed 20-year-old woman on her second week, and lectured her for stacking cups wrong. You millennials have no respect for structure, Catherine snapped. I'm Gen Z, Caro said shyly. Catherine blinked. Oh, that explains everything. When Caro walked away, blinking tears, I quietly intercepted her, still in my disguise. You're doing just fine, I told her softly. Don't let someone else's fragility crush your backbone. She looked up, startled. Thank you. She makes me feel invisible. She sees less than she thinks, I said. And I meant it. Because in truth, Catherine thought she was on display. But she had no idea who was watching. She still didn't know who I was. Not a hint. Not a flicker of suspicion. And that was because of a promise I'd made years ago. When Eric told me he wanted to propose, I looked him in the eyes and said, if you truly love her, fine. But don't give her a path to our business, our holdings, or my name. Let her earn what she wants in life the way I did. If she loves you for who you are, that'll be enough. He didn't understand then. He does now. Catherine had joined the company using her mother's connections. She bragged about getting in on strategy, unaware that the very program she entered was one I'd launched 10 years ago to scout genuine talent. She didn't recognize my name. Ellis was my maiden name. She'd only ever known me as Samantha Grant. And even when the internal memos about the Executive Oversight Initiative came down, she never questioned who sat at the top. She assumed the execs were faceless suits in remote buildings, older men in silent offices. She never thought to imagine a woman behind it all, let alone the one she shoved out of a birthday dinner. As she tossed her gloves into the laundry bin at the end of the shift, I watched her sigh with performative exhaustion. 2 more days, she muttered, then back to the real world. No, not the real world, Catherine. Just the one you've been hiding from. The one where people earn things with quiet grit. Where respect isn't owed to titles, but to decency. I walked away without speaking. I didn't need her to see me yet. That moment would come. And when it did, it wouldn't be about revenge. It would be a mirror, one she couldn't turn away from. The call came just after 8 p.m. I was still at the office, reviewing final notes from the compliance team. They'd confirmed everything I already knew, and more. Catherine hadn't just been unkind. She had quietly derailed careers. People had left because of her. Talented, dedicated professionals who'd given years to the company had walked away quietly, unwilling to make waves. Afraid of her gossip. Afraid of retaliation. I was preparing the final report when my phone vibrated. I recognized the number immediately. Eric, my son. I hesitated. It had been 4 days since the birthday dinner. 4 days since he stood in front of 30 people and told me, his mother, to leave. Not angrily, not with fire, but with shame in his voice, as if I were the one who had disrupted the order of things. I answered on the 3rd ring. Hello, Eric. He sounded tired, hesitant. Hi, Mom. Do you have a minute? I paused. Go ahead. It's about Catherine. Of course it is. She's been really upset, he said. She's saying she's being mistreated at work, that someone's targeting her. She doesn't know who, just that she's been reassigned to menial tasks. She thinks it's political, or personal. I didn't respond. She's not herself, he added, his voice softer. She comes home exhausted, complaining about kitchen grease and fluorescent lights and people being rude to her. Says she's being punished, but no one will tell her why. Still, I stayed silent. She asked me to talk to someone, to find out who's behind it. And you thought of me? I asked finally. He sighed. I didn't know who else to call. I know you used to work in corporate. I thought you might still have contacts. Maybe someone who can smooth it over. There it was. Even now, he didn't see it. He still believed his wife's version of events, still assumed Catherine was the victim of some cruel campaign. He didn't know the hours I'd spent watching her mock immigrants, belittle hardworking staff, or steal credit from juniors. He didn't know she was the campaign, the rot that had quietly grown under a layer of social polish. I closed the file on my screen and leaned back. "I'll meet you," I said. "Really?" "Yes, but on my terms." "Of course." "Tomorrow, my office, noon." There was a pause. "Your office? You know where?" He did, though he hadn't visited it in years, not since he was 23 and fresh out of school, when I offered him a job, and he politely declined. Catherine didn't want him working under his mother. She said it would undermine his masculinity. He never said that out loud, but I knew. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll be there." When I ended the call, I stared out the window for a long time. The city lights flickered like tiny truths in a dark sea. He still didn't see her. Even after everything, the party, the kitchen, the complaints, he couldn't separate her cruelty from her charm. She wrapped herself around him like ivy, slowly squeezing out the air. But tomorrow he would see the truth. Not through anger, not through confrontation, through clarity. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I wore a deep charcoal suit, sharp, elegant, commanding. No soft lines today, no lilac scarves. I wanted Eric to see me as the world saw me, not as mum or the loser at the dinner table, but as the woman who built this empire from a second-hand laptop and a desk she bought with cash and favors. At 11:59 a.m., Dana knocked gently on my door. "He's here," she said. "Send him in." Eric entered slowly, unsure. He looked around the office like a stranger stepping into a museum. "Mum," he said, eyes landing on the corner window, the polished bookshelves, the framed awards. "I didn't know you still—" He trailed off. "Still what?" I asked, gesturing for him to sit. "That you still ran the company." I tilted my head slightly. "You never asked." He sat down across from me, his face pale. "You're the CEO?" "For 35 years, yes." He blinked. "But Catherine, she doesn't know." "She doesn't." "Why?" "Because I asked you not to tell her, and you agreed." He swallowed. "You said it was for privacy." "I said it was to protect what I built." I knew who she was the moment I met her, Eric. I saw how she looked at people, how she measured their value by their shoes and their posture. And I knew if she found out about the company, she'd try to turn it into her stage. His shoulders sagged. "I thought she'd change," he said quietly. "She didn't." "She said someone was trying to destroy her." "No," I corrected. "Someone gave her an opportunity to understand the people she steps on, and she failed. She mocked them, ridiculed their voices, stole their work, belittled their age, their skin, their stories. She was given a window, and she spat on it." He was quiet. "She was cruel to me," I said calmly. "But that's not why she's being investigated. She's being investigated because she's a danger to the culture I fought to protect." His eyes filled with confusion and shame. "She kept saying it was political," he muttered. "It's not political. It's ethical." I slid a file across the desk. Inside, printouts of complaints, photographs, screenshots, performance evaluations, testimonies. He opened it with trembling hands. For several minutes, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "How did I not see this?" "Because you didn't want to." He closed the file. "She'll want to meet with you," he said finally. "She'll try to fix it." "She won't meet with me," I replied. "She already has." His eyes widened. I stood. I was the one watching her in the kitchen, dressed in tech staff blues, clipboard in hand. She spoke about peasants and cumin and surrender, while people with stronger hearts than hers scrubbed pots beside her. And I watched. Every moment. He sat frozen. She's not being punished, Eric. She's being seen for who she really is. There was no triumph in my voice, just truth. I walked around the desk and gently placed my hand on his shoulder. You can still be better than her, I said softly. But not if you keep making excuses for cruelty dressed as charm. He nodded barely. I left him there with the file, and I walked back to the window. The moment of truth had arrived. Not with fury, but with undeniable clarity. And no one, not even Catherine, could escape it now. The meeting was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. sharp. There were no titles in the calendar invite, no signatures, just a simple subject. Performance review, Catherine Monette Grant. The location, Executive Office, floor 27. No hint of what was coming, but I knew Catherine. Her kind always believed they were being summoned for promotions or praise, never consequences. She would arrive poised, expecting a conversation she could control, charm her way through, maybe even demand a transfer or file a complaint. She didn't know the storm had already passed, and the only thing left was the reckoning. At 9:45 a.m., I stood by the window in my office, overlooking the city skyline. It felt right, this height. Not just the literal kind, but the moral kind too. I had taken the long road up here, brick by brick, mistake by mistake. I had scrubbed floors in the early days myself, negotiated with banks that looked at me like a joke, and now I stood above it all, not because I was born with power, but because I had earned it without sacrificing others. Catherine didn't understand that yet, but she would. At 9:58 a.m., Dana's voice came through the intercom. She's here. Send her in. I turned from the window and sat behind my desk. My hands rested lightly on the manila folder laid open before me, the contents curated not for drama, but for truth. The door opened. Catherine stepped inside with a tight, curious smile. She wore a pale beige blouse, modest earrings, and tailored navy trousers. Her look was more subdued than usual. She wanted to appear serious, possibly wounded, possibly misunderstood. She had curated this appearance the same way she curated Instagram captions and press blurbs. She believed appearances were enough. Good morning, she said hesitantly, looking around. Then her eyes landed on me. They flickered once, then again, and her whole body paused. Mrs. Grant? She said slowly. I gave her a calm nod. Good morning, Catherine. Her expression shifted from confusion to discomfort to dread in a matter of seconds. I think I may have the wrong office, she stammered, glancing at the hallway behind her. You don't, I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. Please, sit. She didn't move right away. It was as if the plush carpet beneath her heels had turned into ice. You work here? She asked finally, her voice trembling at the edges. I don't work here, I replied, my tone even. I built this company. She blinked. I'm the CEO, I continued. Founder, majority shareholder. I've gone by Ellis here. It's my maiden name. I kept my personal life, and my family, far from this office for good reason. She sat down slowly, hands gripping her purse like a lifeline. This is your company? She whispered. Yes. She swallowed hard, trying to find footing. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to. I asked Eric not to tell you, and he honored that. She flushed. Why? Because I knew you'd try to use it. I wanted to see who you were without access, without a ladder handed to you, without power shielding your behavior. Her lips parted. I didn't mean to. I raised a hand, calm and unshaking. I'm not here for excuses, Catherine. I'm here for accountability. I slid the folder toward her. She looked down at it, then hesitated before opening it. When she did, her breath caught. Inside were copies of internal complaints, quotes from peer reviews, notes from junior team members, screenshots, statements of her inappropriate comments, her plagiarism, her intimidation. She didn't speak. I did. Maybe if you smiled more, people wouldn't mind your accent. You're from Syria? That must be why you struggle with scheduling. I don't think a 50-year-old should be leading digital content. Their brains are slower. Her face paled. These are just the ones I have in writing, I said. I didn't mean. You meant every word, I said, sharper now. You thought no one important was watching. You thought kindness was optional. You assumed your charm would compensate for your cruelty. She swallowed hard, twisting her fingers in her lap. I didn't know who they were. They were your colleagues. That should have been enough. Tears welled in her eyes now. I saw the panic rising, the fear, not of guilt, but of consequence. The kind of fear people like her only feel when their social mask shatters, and the truth is no longer a rumor, but a report. If I had known, you didn't need to know they were valuable to treat them with basic respect, I said. That's the point. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she whispered, What happens now? I leaned back in my chair. You have two options. Her eyes flickered. One, you resign, today. No reference, no severance. You walk out of here with your pride and little else. She bit her lip, already imagining the headlines. Or, I said, you finish what you started. You return to the kitchen for 3 more months, under supervision, no title, no privileges. You mop floors, you scrape pans, and you earn back the decency you discarded. Her mouth fell open slightly. That's not revenge, I cut in. A chance. She blinked at me, stunned. I was thrown out of your house 5 days ago, I said softly. You looked me in the eye and called me a loser. But I'm still giving you a choice, because I believe everyone should have one. She looked away, shame blooming across her face like a bruise. If you walk away now, you'll spin the story, you'll lie, but you'll always know the truth. She didn't answer, not right away, but I saw the shift in her posture, small, trembling, uncertain. A woman who had always believed she was untouchable, now standing at the edge of a mirror she could no longer ignore. I'll stay, she whispered. I hope you mean it. I do, she said, voice shaking. For your sake, I added. I hope you finally see the people you walk past. She nodded slowly, then stood. For once, she didn't try to regain control. She didn't try to charm or blame. She just walked toward the door, shoulders hunched, dignity stripped down to its roots. And I let her go, not to punish her, but to give her a chance to rebuild, brick by brick, the same way I once did. Only this time, with clean hands and a clear conscience. When Catherine arrived at the kitchen that morning, she walked with the stiff posture of someone trying to perform endurance rather than embody it. Her back was straight, but her expression was clenched. Her hands trembled slightly when she tied on her apron. She greeted no one. She wasn't there to listen. She was there to survive it, like a formality she could check off a list. I watched her from the hallway, discreet, unseen. She was quieter now, yes. No more insults, no overt mockery. But it wasn't reflection, it was resistance. You could see it in the way she handled the sponge, slamming it into metal trays like they had personally offended her. In the way she sighed loudly when someone asked her to restock the cups. In the way her eyes narrowed at every set of instructions, as though enduring humiliation for a future victory. That afternoon, I got the call. Eric. Again. His voice was tense. Can we come over tonight? I didn't ask what prompted it. I simply said, yes, 8 o'clock. I knew this would come. After the performance review, after the folder, after the crack in the illusion I'd placed before him. Eric would either try to rescue his wife or start seeing her without the fog she so artfully spun around him. When they arrived at my home that evening, I saw it immediately. The silence between them. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but pulsing. Too much unsaid, too much suddenly known. Eric looked tired, worn in a way I hadn't seen before, as if the foundation of his certainty had been quietly pulled out from under him. Catherine was more composed, but her confidence had a jagged edge. like she'd spent the whole car ride rehearsing arguments she still wasn't sure would work. I led them into the sitting room. The lights were low, the fireplace crackling in the corner, casting soft orange reflections on the glass coffee table. I had already laid out the folder again, not because I needed to say anything new, but because the truth didn't change. Only people did. We sat. I waited. Eric broke the silence first. I asked Catherine to come, he said. I told her, I need to hear everything, from you, without interpretation. I looked at him. And from her? He hesitated. I can't trust her version anymore. I'm sorry, Catherine, but I need the truth. She flinched, her composure flickering. Eric, you know me. You know I'd never intentionally hurt anyone. I've worked hard. I've done everything to succeed in that company. And in doing so, I said quietly, you've stepped on everyone who didn't serve your image of success. Catherine's jaw tensed. You set me up. You manipulated the situation so I'd look bad. I gave you a chance, I said calmly. I sent you into the kitchen to observe, not to punish. And what did you do? You mocked people. You sneered at their accents. You stole credit and silenced feedback. You weren't caught. You were recorded by their lived experience. I slid the folder toward Eric again. These aren't just complaints. These are voices. This is what you've been protecting. He flipped it open. Slowly. He read the same lines I'd shown him before, but this time, with his wife sitting beside him, her gaze darting between the text and his expression. He didn't look at her. His hands gripped the edges of the paper so tightly I feared it would tear. She called me outdated in front of my entire team. I've worked here for 19 years. She told me I looked like a cleaning lady from the 70s during a Zoom call. She laughed when I corrected her, said, well, it's cute that you still think you're sharp at that age. She took my strategy deck and repackaged it as her own. Didn't even remove my notes. Eric closed the file. His voice was quiet. This is what you've been doing? Catherine was pale. Her voice trembled. Those quotes are out of context. I was under pressure. The culture. Everyone jokes. No, Eric said firmly, for the first time raising his voice. No, Catherine. This isn't culture. This is bullying. She looked genuinely stunned. You said someone was trying to ruin you, he continued. You told me you were being targeted, that someone in leadership had it out for you. She opened her mouth, but he held up a hand. All this time I believed you. I stood up for you when Mum tried to talk to me. I told her she was overreacting, that she just didn't understand you. He looked at me, guilt pooling in his eyes. And I let you leave our house like a stranger, like someone who had no place at the table. I didn't speak. I let him unravel it. He turned back to her. Why, Catherine? Why did you lie to me? I didn't lie, she whispered. I didn't think they'd take it so seriously. I thought if I acted confident, I could get ahead. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I didn't know it would follow me like this. You didn't know? He asked. Or you didn't care? She had no answer, and for the first time, I saw her for what she truly was. Not a monster. Just someone so obsessed with winning that she'd forgotten what it meant to respect others along the way. Eric stood. I need time, he said to her. Her eyes widened. Eric. I don't trust you, he said, the words like cold steel in the room. And that's not something I can ignore anymore. He turned to me. I don't know what to say, Mum. You don't need to say anything, I replied softly. Just start seeing clearly. He nodded, then walked to the door. He paused only once, to look at her, and then walked out into the night. Catherine stood slowly. I thought you'd be gloating, she said, her voice brittle. You've been waiting for this moment. No, I said, meeting her eyes. I've been hoping it wouldn't come to this. She lowered her gaze, then turned and followed Eric out the door. The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was clean. And in that silence, I finally felt the truth settle. Not as revenge, as restoration. The next morning, the world was unusually quiet. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that comes after something cracks and hasn't yet finished breaking. I didn't expect a call, but around 11 a.m., I heard the familiar chime of my phone. It was Eric. "Can I come by?" he asked, voice low. "It won't take long." I said yes, though I already knew this visit wouldn't be brief. Not emotionally. When the knock came, I opened the door to find them both standing there. Eric looked hollow, not angry, just done, like a man who had spent the night lifting heavy truths he never thought he'd have to carry. Catherine, in contrast, was trying to play calm. She wore a beige coat over her shoulders, her makeup applied with a heavier hand than usual, but I could see the cracks underneath. Her mask was slipping. I stepped aside wordlessly. They sat on opposite ends of the sofa. No one spoke at first. Then Eric cleared his throat. "I asked Catherine to pack a few things," he said. "She'll be staying with her mother." Catherine turned her face toward the window. "She needs space," he added. "And so do I." My heart ached, not with satisfaction, but with grief. This wasn't what I had wanted. It was never about their marriage. I had fought for the right to not be erased. Catherine finally turned to me. "You win," she said flatly. Is that what you wanted? Break up your son's marriage? Humiliate me? Ruin my career and my name?" I stood still, hands folded in front of me. "I didn't want to win," I said. "I wanted to be seen." "Oh, don't pretend you're innocent," she hissed. "You orchestrated all of this. The kitchen, the reviews, the performance file. You played us all. You were sitting there at my son's birthday party, pretending to be this helpless, pitiful old woman, and all the while you were plotting—" "No," I interrupted, voice steady. "I was sitting at that table trying not to cry when you called me a loser and told your husband, my son, to throw me out." Catherine scoffed, but it didn't carry the bite it once did. "You're a disgrace," she muttered, quieter now. "All that power, and you used it for this?" That word hit hard, harder than I expected. Disgrace. I sat down across from her, and for the first time, I let her hear what had been sitting inside me for years. "You think I did this for revenge?" I asked. "Catherine, I have survived things you cannot imagine. I've been overlooked, dismissed, underpaid, underestimated, and still I built something that mattered. But in your house, in your presence, I wasn't even allowed to be a human being." She looked away, jaw clenched. "I came to Polo's party to be a grandmother," I continued, "to give him a gift and sit with my family. I didn't want to run the room. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to be there." My voice shook, but I kept going. "And you made me feel like garbage at my own grandson's birthday, like I didn't belong, like I was a burden. That's what's been hurting me." Eric lowered his eyes. "I didn't need flowers or apologies," I said. "I needed you to look at me and say, 'You're welcome here.' But instead, I got silence. From you, and from the son I raised." Eric's throat moved like he was trying to speak, but no words came out. Catherine looked at me again, and for a moment I thought I saw something. Not understanding, but discomfort. The kind of discomfort that comes when someone else's truth refuses to match the story you've built around yourself. But it didn't last. "You think this makes you noble?" she spat. "You weaponized your role. You used your status to turn everyone against me." "I used my position to protect the people you humiliated, and to protect myself. That's not a weapon, Catherine. That's a boundary." She stood abruptly. "I have nothing more to say." Eric stood too. He reached for the bag sitting near the door, her overnight case packed neatly. A small gesture, but heavy. He didn't look at her as he handed it over. "You'll stay at your mother's," he said. She looked at him like she didn't recognize him. "You're letting her drive us apart," she said, her voice brittle. "After everything? I'm letting you face what you've done. he replied. His voice wasn't angry. It was quiet, steady, and that made it worse. She turned to me once more. You always wanted him back to yourself. I stood slowly. No, I said. I wanted to be allowed to love my family without being treated like I was in the way. Catherine looked at the door. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't need to. She stepped into the hallway, and for the first time in years, the room felt light again. Eric lingered. I was wrong, he said, not looking at me. Yes, I answered gently. I thought she was strong, but she's only strong when she has someone to step on. I reached for his hand. You're not her, I said, and you can still decide who you want to be. He squeezed my fingers. Not long, but long enough. Then he left. The door closed, and I stood alone in my living room, not triumphant, not victorious, but seen, and that, finally, was enough. Catherine's resignation was formalized on a Monday morning. Her signature was tight and angled, as if she had carved it into the page. I read every line of the voluntary termination agreement, slowly, before adding my own. S. Ellis, Chief Executive Officer. There were no handshakes, no meetings, no walkout with flowers and farewells. Just an envelope, a file, and a silent close to a story she had long misunderstood. I included a professional reference, not because she deserved it, but because I did. I would not sink to her level. The letter was polite, restrained, and honest. Catherine Monette Grant served with the company for 14 months in the marketing division. During that time, she exhibited strong presentation skills and was capable of handling multiple projects simultaneously. She elected to step away from the company to pursue other opportunities. We wish her well in her future endeavors. I didn't mention the complaints, the performance review, or the kitchen. I could have. I didn't. Because Catherine was no longer my burden to correct. She was now her own lesson to carry. I believed that would be the end of it. But some people don't know how to walk away quietly. By Friday, the tremors began. It started with a LinkedIn post. 3 paragraphs, carefully worded. Not direct, but sharp enough to cut through the professional surface of the platform. When women in power feel threatened, they don't fire you. They isolate you, humiliate you. They send you into places they'd never step foot in themselves and call it character building. I was never afraid of hard work, but I was afraid of systems that punish women who speak their minds. I left with my integrity. They can keep their kitchens. No names, no details. But those who had worked in the building, who knew her story, knew who the post was about. And Catherine knew that. It wasn't long before the whispers began. A freelance designer I'd worked with 2 years ago sent me a text. Just saw Catherine's post? Did something happen? A retired board member forwarded it with a single question. Is this about you? The irony of it all was that I had stepped into that kitchen myself. I had worn the apron, held the sponge. I'd eaten lunch at the same table as the women Catherine called peasants. But her followers didn't care about facts. They cared about narrative. And Catherine was spinning hers with every ounce of PR skill she had left. By the next week, she had published 2 more posts, one on her personal blog titled, What Happens When You Outshine the Queen Bee, and another Instagram story featuring a blurred photo of the executive floor and the words, Be careful who you call mentor. They might be the one blocking your promotion. My phone lit up daily. Messages, emails, a few veiled criticisms. One anonymous comment from a supposed former colleague said I had a known history of insecurity around younger women. Another claimed I had abused authority by forcing personal vendettas into corporate policy. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so familiar, because I'd seen this before. Every time a woman in power made a decision that someone didn't like, she was framed as emotional, vengeful, a queen bee, the angry matriarch, never the leader, never the one protecting the integrity of the system. Still, it hurt, even with all my experience, even with my age, even with my power. It still hurt. Dana entered my office one morning with tension in her shoulders. "There's been another post," she said carefully. I looked up. She mentioned polo. That made me pause. She said she was alienated from her stepson's life because of a matriarch's obsession with control. I set my pen down. No rage boiled in me, no tremor, just a quiet, heavy sadness. She had now turned to the one place I'd drawn a line: my family. Not even to save her marriage, but to save her image. "What would you like us to do?" Dana asked. "We could issue a public clarification." "No?" "We could file for defamation." "No," I said again. She blinked. "Why?" "Because the people who know me don't need an explanation," I said, "and the people who believe her wouldn't listen to one anyway." Dana didn't speak. She just nodded and left. The very next day, the company held its quarterly staff assembly. I had considered skipping it, not out of fear, but fatigue, but something in me said I should be there. Not to speak, just to stand, to let people see me. As I walked into the room, heads turned. Some looked surprised, others smiled. A few nodded quietly. After the department updates were presented, Maritza, yes, the kitchen manager, was asked to stand and say a few words. It was part of a new initiative we'd started months ago, rotating voices at each assembly. She spoke clearly, with strength. "No matter how high you rise," she said, "you're only respected if the people you step over still say your name with peace." I looked around the room. Dozens of eyes met mine, and they were warm. After the meeting, one of our older engineers, Marcus, approached me. "Ma'am," he said, removing his glasses, "I just wanted to say, you didn't have to do what you did, but you did, and a lot of us noticed." I nodded, my throat tight. A few more people came up. Quiet thanks. A squeeze of the hand, a smile. One of the interns slipped me a card later that read, "Thank you for reminding us that strength can be quiet, and that dignity doesn't need applause." As for Catherine, she kept posting for a few more weeks. Her audience thinned. The likes began to dwindle. The praise turned to silence. Eventually, she moved cities, started a consulting business. Occasionally, someone would mention her name in passing, but she was no longer a threat. She was a story people told, about how arrogance can wear lipstick, and how charm without empathy always curdles into self-pity. I never responded publicly, but I never stopped showing up, because in the end, the only legacy that matters is the one you leave in the people who felt safe around you. And for the first time in a long time, the halls of my company felt safe again. Not perfect, but safe. And that was enough. 6 months. That's how much time has passed since Catherine walked out of my office with her coat slung over her arm, convinced she'd find a way to rewrite her own downfall. But time, unlike people, doesn't lie. In 6 months, things settle. The noise quiets, the masks fall away, and you begin to see the real shape of what was left behind. The company has changed, not because of headlines or PR campaigns, but because truth was finally allowed to breathe. That's all it needed. Just space. And a little courage. What began as a review turned into a full restructure. The mentorship program I once piloted in my early years, one that Catherine had dismissed as sentimental, has been reborn. But now, it's more than just career advice. It's a bridge. We now pair senior staff with junior hires, not to teach them the ropes, but to listen, really listen. It's about exchanging not only knowledge, but empathy, experience, and curiosity. We called it the Dignity Initiative. And for once, that word, dignity, is more than a plaque on a wall. It's alive. It lives in team meetings where no one interrupts the soft-spoken woman who used to be overlooked. It lives in the way a 25-year-old intern asks a 62-year-old product lead to co-host a creative session. It lives in how feedback is shared, how promotions are considered, and how jokes about age are no longer tolerated with awkward smiles, but challenged with conviction. There are fewer transfers, fewer resignations, and far more eye contact in the hallways. I've heard stories from staff I never knew by name. Rosa, one of our longtime cleaners, told me her grandson applied for an internship, not because of the paycheck, but because he wanted to work in a place where people like his grandma mattered. That made me cry. But not from sadness, from pride. At home, change has taken a slower, softer form. Eric and I don't talk about Catherine much. Their separation was quiet, respectful. No public breakdowns, no scandal. Just two people realizing that one had grown and the other had built her world on illusions that couldn't hold. He moved into a smaller flat near his office. He takes Polo every other week. And every Sunday, without fail, he comes over to my house, just him and Polo, with a carton of almond milk and a bag of blueberries, because that's what Mum likes for her cereal. He doesn't apologize anymore. He doesn't need to. His presence is his apology, his attentiveness, his willingness to listen without defending. That is the new language we speak. We are no longer mother and son separated by misunderstanding. We are two people learning each other again. One walk at a time. One laugh at a time. And Polo? My little boy in a paper crown? He's growing taller. His front teeth have filled in, and he now wears his socks mismatched, because matching is boring. He loves drawing superheroes, not the caped kind, but the everyday kind. One day, he showed me a sketch of a woman in a suit holding a briefcase and a sponge. Underneath, he had written, "Super Grandma." When I asked why she had both, he said, "Because she cleans up the mess and still makes big decisions." I laughed until I cried. He comes over every Saturday afternoon. We bake scones, paint with watercolors, plant herbs in old tea tins. Last week, we started writing a little story together about a squirrel who stands up to a bully raccoon in the forest. He says it's not based on anyone, but I see the message in every line. Sometimes I think about Catherine. I wonder what stories she tells now. I imagine she still posts curated reflections online, carefully omitting the part where her downfall was not a conspiracy, but a mirror. I do not respond. I do not check. She is no longer in my narrative. And that is her greatest loss. The chance to grow in the presence of people who were willing to forgive her, if only she had stopped spinning. But perhaps the deepest consequence she faces is this. She no longer gets to rewrite me. For so long, she tried. She tried to reduce me to a stereotype. The bitter mother-in-law, the failed woman, the irrelevant relic. But now, the truth is standing in my place. Not louder, not harsher, just rooted. I am not angry. I am not even triumphant. I am full. Every morning, I wake up early and walk through the garden. The lavender is blooming again. The peonies are shy this year, but they'll open in their own time. There's a new bench beneath the magnolia tree where I sit and read, or sometimes write in a journal that no one else will ever see. Sometimes, I just sit in silence and listen to the wind. It no longer feels like it's pushing against me. It feels like it's carrying me. 6 months ago, I was called a loser. Now I am called by name. In emails. In handwritten thank you notes. In quiet conversations. People say, "You changed something here." But the truth is, I didn't change anything. I simply stood still when others walked away. I spoke when others stayed silent. I refused to pretend that cruelty was strength or that silence was dignity. And now, I am free. Free from shame, free from proving, free to be a grandmother, free to be a leader, free to be a woman who chose truth and found peace. Not in a boardroom, not in a courtroom, but in a garden, with flower on her hands, and a grandson who believes she is a superhero.